The dust from the stagecoach explosion still hung in the air when Sarah Mitchell realized she was the only survivor. Standing alone on a desolate stretch of Arizona Territory Road in the scorching summer of 1876, with nothing but the torn dress on her back and a heart heavy with loss that seemed too great to bear. She stumbled away from the wreckage, her ears ringing from the blast that had killed the driver and the other 3 passengers. The bandits who had attacked them were long gone, having taken everything of value and left her for dead among the smoking ruins. Sarah's hands trembled as she looked down at herself, covered in dust and ash, her carefully packed trunk with all her worldly possessions now scattered and burned across the desert floor. She had been traveling to Tombstone to start fresh after losing her family's farm in Kansas to debt collectors, carrying the last $100 her father had hidden away before he died. Now even that was gone, stolen by men whose faces she had barely glimpsed before the dynamite tore through the coach. The sun beat down mercilessly as Sarah began walking, though she had no idea where she was going or how far the nearest town might be. Her throat was already parched, and the heat seemed to press against her skin like a physical weight. She had walked perhaps 2 miles when her legs began to shake, and she knew she would not make it much farther. The landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, nothing but scrub brush and red rock and a sky so blue it hurt to look at. That was when she heard the sound of hooves approaching from behind. Sarah turned, squinting against the sun, and saw a lone rider coming toward her at an easy pace. As he drew closer, she could make out more details. A tall man on a paint horse, wearing a weather-beaten hat and dusty trail clothes. He slowed his mount when he reached her, his dark eyes taking in her disheveled appearance with concern rather than judgment. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat, "you look like you have had yourself a rough day." Sarah tried to speak, but her voice came out as barely more than a croak. The cowboy dismounted immediately, reaching for his canteen and offering it to her. She drank gratefully, the warm water tasting better than anything she could remember. "There was an attack," she managed after she had caught her breath. "Bandits hit the stagecoach about 2 miles back. Everyone else is dead." The cowboy's expression darkened. "I heard the explosion earlier but figured it was miners blasting. Name is James Cordell. I have been working a cattle drive that is camped about 5 miles west of here." He looked back in the direction she had come from. "We should report this to the marshal in Prescott, but that is a full day's ride. Are you hurt?" "No, just shaken." Sarah felt tears threatening and fought them back. "They took everything. My money, my belongings, everything I had left in this world." James studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Well, you are alive, and that counts for something. Come on, I will take you to our camp. The trail boss will know what to do." He helped her up onto his horse, then swung up behind her. Sarah felt self-conscious about the closeness, but she was too exhausted to protest. As they rode, James kept up a steady stream of quiet conversation, perhaps sensing that she needed the distraction. "We have been driving a herd up from Texas," he explained. "About 2,000 head of cattle bound for the railhead. Been on the trail for near 3 months now. It is hard work, but honest." "I was going to Tombstone," Sarah said quietly. "I had heard there were opportunities there for women willing to work. I can cook and sew and keep books." "Tombstone is a rough place," James observed, "but I suppose anywhere out here can be rough for a woman alone." He paused. "If you do not mind my asking, what happened that left you traveling by yourself?" Sarah took a breath and told him about the farm, about her father's death from pneumonia the previous winter, about the creditors who had taken everything and left her with barely enough to buy a stagecoach ticket west. By the time she finished, they were approaching the cattle camp, and she could see the herd spread out across a wide valley, with several wagons and a handful of men moving among them. The trail boss was a grizzled man named Hosea Briggs who listened to Sarah's story with a serious expression. "Those bandits have been hitting coaches along that route for weeks now," he said. "The marshal has not been able to catch them yet." He looked at Sarah with sympathy. "You are welcome to stay with us tonight, miss. We will be reaching Prescott in 3 days and you can decide what to do from there." Sarah felt a wave of gratitude but also a deep uncertainty. "I have no money to pay you for your kindness. We are not asking for payment," Hosea said firmly. "The code out here is you help folks when they need it, simple as that." Over the next 3 days, Sarah traveled with the cattle drive and learned what it meant to live on the trail. The chuck wagon cook, an older man named Pete, put her to work helping with meals, and she was grateful for something to do that kept her hands and mind occupied. James checked on her often, bringing her coffee in the mornings and sitting with her by the fire in the evenings while the other cowboys played cards or told stories. "You do not talk much about yourself," Sarah observed on the second night as they sat a little apart from the others. The stars overhead were so bright and numerous that they seemed to press down from the sky. James smiled slightly. "Not much to tell. I have been working cattle since I was 16, that is 10 years now. Grew up in Colorado, but my folks passed when I was young. An uncle raised me, taught me the trade." He poked at the fire with a stick. "I always figured I would save up enough to buy my own spread someday, but it seems like the money goes out as fast as it comes in." "That is how it was with the farm," Sarah said softly. "My father worked himself to death trying to keep it going, and in the end, it did not matter. The debt was too much." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the cattle settling for the night and the distant howl of a coyote. Sarah found herself watching James in the firelight, noticing the strong lines of his face and the gentle way he carried himself despite his obvious strength. She had known him for only 2 days, but there was something steady about him that made her feel safe for the first time since the attack. When they reached Prescott, Hosea gave Sarah $2 from the camp fund and told her it was wages for her help with the cooking. She knew it was charity, but she took it with gratitude because she had no other choice. James accompanied her to the marshal's office where she gave a statement about the robbery. The marshal, a tired-looking man with silver hair, took notes but did not seem optimistic about catching the bandits. "They hit fast and disappear into the hills," he explained. "We have had posses out looking, but this is big country with lots of places to hide." As they left the office, Sarah felt the weight of her situation settling over her again. $2 would buy her a few meals and perhaps one night in a boarding house, but after that, she would be destitute. James seemed to sense her despair. "Come on," he said gently. "Let us get some proper food in you and we can figure out what comes next." They went to a small restaurant where James ordered steaks and potatoes for both of them. Sarah protested that it was too expensive, but he waved her off. "When is the last time you had a good meal?" he asked, and she realized she could not remember. As they ate, James seemed to be working up to something. Finally, he set down his fork and looked at her seriously. "The drive is heading up to Flagstaff next, then across to the railhead in Hallbrook. That is another month of travel. Hosea said you are welcome to stay on as camp help if you want. Pete could use the assistance and it would give you time to figure out your next move. The pay would not be much, but it is something." Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Why are you being so kind to me? You do not even know me." James was quiet for a moment, then said, "My mother died when I was 12. She took sick and we did not have money for a doctor. After she passed, my father just sort of gave up. Stopped eating, stopped caring. He was gone within 6 months. My uncle took me in, but I never forgot what it felt like to be helpless, to have nothing." He met her eyes. "I see that same look in your face sometimes, like you are drowning and trying not to let anyone see. I cannot fix what happened to you, but I can offer a hand up, that is all." Sarah felt tears spilling down her cheeks before she could stop them. "I have got nothing left to give," she whispered, the words torn from somewhere deep inside her. James reached across the table and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm and steady around hers. "Your company is more than enough," he said softly. Sarah joined the cattle drive the next morning, and for the first time in months she felt something other than despair. The work was hard, starting before dawn and not ending until after dark, but it gave her purpose. She cooked alongside Pete, learning his tricks for making decent meals over an open fire with limited supplies. She mended clothes for the cowboys, stitched up a nasty gash in one man's arm when he got tangled with some barbed wire they were transporting, and gradually became part of the small community that traveled together across the vast Arizona landscape. James was her constant companion whenever his duties allowed. He taught her to ride properly, putting her on his gentle paint horse and walking alongside until she got the hang of it. He showed her how to read the weather in the clouds and the behavior of the cattle, how to spot water from a distance, and which plants were safe to eat if supplies ran low. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, and Sarah found herself opening up in ways she had not with anyone since her father died. "I was engaged once," she told him one evening as they rode out to check on a section of the herd that had wandered. "His name was Thomas, and we were supposed to marry in the spring of '75. But when my father got sick and the debts started piling up, Thomas decided he did not want to tie himself to a losing proposition. He married the banker's daughter instead. Then he was a fool," James said flatly. "Any man who would turn his back on someone he claimed to love because of money is not worth your tears." "I do not cry for him anymore," Sarah said, and realized it was true. "I think I cry for who I was back then, for the girl who thought everything would work out if she just tried hard enough." "That is not a bad way to be," James observed. "The world just has a way of teaching us harder lessons than we want to learn." As the weeks passed and the drive continued north, Sarah became aware of a shift in her feelings toward James. It was not just gratitude anymore, though she was certainly grateful. It was something deeper, something that made her heart speed up when she saw him riding toward camp at the end of a long day, something that made her smile for no reason when she thought of things he had said. She caught herself watching him when he was not looking, admiring the easy way he sat a horse and the kindness he showed to the younger cowboys who were learning the trade. She was not sure what to do with these feelings. Sarah had been hurt badly by Thomas's betrayal, and part of her wanted to guard her heart carefully against any more pain. But James was so different from Thomas, so steady and genuine, that it was hard to maintain her defenses around him. They were camped near a place called Mormon Lake when things came to a head. A storm had blown in during the afternoon, one of the violent summer thunderstorms that turned the sky black and sent lightning crashing all around. The cattle had gotten spooked, and it had taken all hands to keep them from stampeding. Sarah had huddled in the chuck wagon with Pete, listening to the thunder and worrying about James and the others out in the chaos. When the storm finally passed and the men began returning to camp, Sarah counted them anxiously. They were all accounted for except James. She felt her heart begin to pound with fear, and before she knew what she was doing, she had grabbed a lantern and started back toward where she had last seen him riding. "Miss Sarah, you should not go out there alone," Pete called after her, but she ignored him. She found James about a quarter-mile from camp, sitting on the ground next to his horse, which was favoring one leg. When he looked up and saw her, his expression was a mixture of surprise and something else she could not quite identify. "What are you doing out here?" he asked as she hurried over to him. "I was worried about you," Sarah said, setting down the lantern and kneeling beside him. "Are you hurt?" "Just bruised pride," James admitted. "Lightning struck near us and my horse reared, threw me clean off and came down wrong on his front leg. I think it is just a strain, but he cannot carry me back to camp tonight." Sarah examined the horse's leg as best she could in the lantern light, running her hands gently over the swollen joint. "We should get cold water on this if we can." "There is a creek just over that rise," James said. "But Sarah, you should not have come looking for me. What if you had gotten lost?" "Then you would have come looking for me," she said simply, meeting his eyes. "That is what you do, James. You look out for people." Something in his expression shifted, and he reached out to brush a strand of wet hair from her face. "Not people," he said quietly. I look out for you because the thought of something happening to you makes me feel like I cannot breathe." Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. "James, I know I have got no right to say this," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "You have been through hell, and the last thing you probably want is some cowboy getting ideas above his station. But Sarah, these past weeks with you have been the best I can remember. You make me want to be better, to build something permanent instead of just drifting from one job to the next. I am falling in love with you, and I needed you to know it, even if you cannot feel the same way." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face again, but this time they were not tears of despair. "I can feel the same way," she whispered. "I do feel the same way. I have been so scared to let myself care about anyone again, but James, you make me feel safe and valued and like maybe I could be happy again someday." James pulled her into his arms and she clung to him, breathing in the scent of rain and leather and something uniquely him. They stayed like that for a long moment, just holding each other under the clearing sky with the stars beginning to emerge overhead. "We should get back to camp," James said eventually, though he made no move to let her go. "They will be wondering where we are." "Let them wonder a little longer," Sarah said, and then she kissed him. It was soft and tentative at first, both of them learning the shape of this new thing between them. But then James deepened the kiss, one hand coming up to cradle the back of her head, and Sarah felt like she was falling and flying at the same time. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing hard. "Well," James said, a smile spreading across his face. "That was worth getting thrown from my horse." Sarah laughed, the sound bubbling up from somewhere deep inside her, and realized it was the first time she had truly laughed since before her father died. They made their way slowly back to camp, leading the limping horse between them and stealing kisses whenever they stopped to rest. The other cowboys ribbed them mercilessly when they finally returned, but it was good-natured, and Hosea just smiled knowingly and said he had seen it coming from the day James brought Sarah into camp. Over the following weeks, as the drive continued toward Holbrook, Sarah and James were inseparable. They rode together when possible, sat close at meals, and talked long into the night about their dreams for the future. "I have been saving my wages," James told her one evening. "I have got about $300 put away. That is not enough to buy much of a ranch, but it is a start. There is good land down near Tucson that is opening up for homesteading. If a man was willing to work hard, he could build something there." "And if a woman was willing to work hard alongside him?" Sarah asked, her heart in her throat. James turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Sarah Mitchell, I know we have not known each other long by most people's standards. But I have never been more sure of anything in my life than I am of this. Marry me. Let us build that ranch together, make a life where we do not have to answer to anyone but each other." Sarah felt joy flooding through her, so intense it was almost painful. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." They were wed by a circuit preacher in Holbrook 3 weeks later, with the entire crew of the cattle drive in attendance. Hosea gave Sarah away, and Pete baked a special cake that he claimed was his grandmother's secret recipe. Sarah wore a simple blue dress that one of the cowboys had ridden into town to buy for her as a wedding gift from the crew. It was not the fancy wedding she had once imagined with Thomas, but it was perfect in every way that mattered. That night, in the small hotel room they had rented for their wedding night, James held her gently and made love to her with a tenderness that made her cry again. "Happy tears," she assured him when he pulled back in concern. "These are happy tears." After the drive ended and they collected their pay, Sarah and James headed south toward Tucson with their combined savings of nearly $400 and a determination to make something of themselves. They filed a homestead claim on 160 acres of land in the Santa Cruz Valley, near a small settlement called Tubac. The land was rough and dry, but there was a creek running through it and good grazing in the hills. The first year was brutal. They lived in a tent while James built their cabin, working from sunup to sundown cutting timber and fitting logs. Sarah kept their camp, cooked their meals, and helped whenever she could, holding boards in place or mixing mud for chinking. Her hands became as calloused as his, and her skin turned brown from the constant sun. They bought their first cattle with money James earned working odd jobs in Tucson, just 10 head to start. Sarah planted a garden near the creek, coaxing vegetables from the stubborn soil. They acquired chickens, and Sarah learned to make butter and cheese. It was hard work, lonely at times, but Sarah had never been happier. Every night she fell asleep in James's arms, and every morning she woke to his kiss and the knowledge that they were building this life together. Their first winter on the ranch, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. She told James on Christmas morning, and she would never forget the look of pure joy on his face as he picked her up and spun her around their small cabin. "We are going to be a family," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Their son was born in September of 1877, delivered by a midwife from Tubac named Rosa, who became a good friend to Sarah. They named him William after James's father, and he was perfect in every way. James was a devoted father, staying up with Sarah during those long early nights when the baby would not sleep, walking the floor with William cradled against his broad chest while singing old cowboy songs in his rumbling voice. The ranch grew slowly but steadily. James was tireless in his work, and Sarah matched him effort for effort. They added more cattle, built a proper barn, and fenced their best pastures. Other homesteaders moved into the area, and a real community began to develop. Sarah organized socials and helped establish a small school where children from the scattered ranches could come for learning a few months out of the year. Their second child, a daughter they named Emily, was born in the spring of 1879. She had Sarah's green eyes and James's dark hair, and she ruled the household from the moment she arrived. William was a patient older brother, already showing signs of his father's steady temperament. As the years passed, Sarah sometimes thought back to that terrible day when the stagecoach had been attacked, when she had stood alone in the desert thinking her life was over. It seemed like something from another lifetime, something that had happened to a different person. The woman she had been then, broken and desperate, had been transformed by James's love and by the life they had built together. It was not always easy. There were droughts that killed their cattle and winters that were harsher than expected. There were times when money was so tight that Sarah did not know how they would make it through. But they always found a way, and they always had each other. On their 10th wedding anniversary, James took Sarah up to the high meadow that overlooked their ranch. It had grown considerably since those early days. The original cabin had been expanded and improved, and there were now several outbuildings, substantial herds and fields of hay waving in the breeze. William, now 9, was helping his father with the ranch work, and Emily, at 7, was already showing a talent for gentling horses. "Do you remember what I told you that first night in Prescott?" James asked as they sat together watching the sun set over their land. "You told me a lot of things that night," Sarah said with a smile. "I told you that your company was more than enough," James said, taking her hand. "And Sarah, every single day since then has proven that true. You are my partner, my best friend, the mother of my children, and the love of my life. I would live through all of it again, every hardship and struggle, if it meant ending up here with you." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him and the steady beat of his heart. "When I lost everything that day," she said softly, "I thought I had nothing left to give to the world or to anyone in it. But you showed me that I was wrong. You showed me that sometimes losing everything is just making room for something better." They sat together as the stars came out, the same stars that had watched over them that night at the cattle camp when they had first admitted their feelings. Sarah thought about the girl she had been, terrified and alone on a dusty Arizona road, and the woman she had become, strong and loved and home at last. 2 more children came in the following years, another son named Henry and a daughter they called Rose. The ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful in the valley. James's reputation as an honest dealer and skilled cattleman spread, and he was elected to serve on the territorial council for a term. Sarah became known for her generosity, never turning away anyone who came to their door needing help, remembering too well what it felt like to be desperate. William grew into a fine young man who took over more and more of the ranch operations as James got older. Emily married a neighboring rancher's son, a good man who treated her well and made her laugh. Henry showed an aptitude for learning and went off to school in Tucson, planning to become a lawyer. Rose stayed home the longest, her father's pet, learning everything he could teach her about horses and cattle and the land. On a warm evening in the spring of 1900, James and Sarah sat on the porch of their home, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. They were both in their 60s now, their hair silver and their faces lined, but the love between them was as strong as ever. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had ridden a different trail that day?" James asked, his arm around Sarah's shoulders. "No," Sarah said firmly. "Because I do not believe in coincidences, not anymore. I think we were meant to find each other, meant to build this life. Everything that came before, all the pain and loss, it led us to that dusty road where you found me with nothing left to give." "And I found everything I ever needed," James said, kissing the top of her head. As the sun set over the ranch they had built with their own hands, Sarah felt a deep contentment settle over her. She had started with nothing, just a broken woman in a torn dress standing in the desert. But with James beside her, she had built a legacy of love and family and hard work that would endure long after they were gone. Their children and grandchildren would carry forward the values they had lived by. Kindness to those in need, hard work, honesty, and above all, love that saw beyond circumstances to the person beneath. The wild country that had nearly claimed her life had instead given her everything worth having. And it all started with a cowboy who saw past her desperate circumstances and valued her for who she was, not what she had to offer. In giving her a chance when she had nothing, James had given her the world, and she had spent every day since then making sure he knew how precious that gift had been. As darkness fell and the children were called inside, James and Sarah remained on the porch a while longer, hands clasped, hearts full. Their love story written in the very soil of the ranch around them and in the faces of the family they had created together. It was a story that had begun with loss and desperation, but had become something beautiful, a testament to the transforming power of love and the strength of two people who refused to give up on each other or on the future they dreamed of building. The stars came out one by one, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss, their wedding, the births of their children, and every precious moment in between. And under that vast Arizona sky, Sarah Mitchell Cordell knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly who she was meant to be with, living the life she was meant to live. She had found her home, not in a place, but in the heart of the man beside her, and that was worth more than all the riches in the world.